Greetings, everyone. And our speakers tonight, we have Syed Nousherwan Kirmani, and he is currently pursuing his bachelor's in the field of media sciences from Ziauddin University. He's an avid lover of art, poetry, and cinema. As an ardent bibliophile, he strongly believes that the craft of storytelling is paramount of all humans. So, dear team of Peace and Justice, we have Nousherwan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Maheen, for that lovely introduction. I think by now all of you are familiar with the topic of discussion for today, which is the importance of book reading, which I strongly believe is paramount for everyone. Now, before we get into this, I would just like to say that I like to keep my sessions interactive because being a student, I know that Zoom or any other platform where we have these online classes and things, it's very difficult to understand or actually get to know that who is still with us. So I will be asking questions and you can answer if you choose. Now, when we talk about the importance of book reading, we understand that, okay, so this particular notion demands us to read books, but we don't really understand that why is it important to read books. I'm sure that everyone who is in this meeting can relate to this, and it's when we say that when we were little, our parents used to tell us that you need to read books. Now, that is one thing. They used to tell us that, okay, you need to read a lot, you read this book and that book, but they never actually explained that what is the main reason that we need to read, So here I would like to ask any one of you, please tell me that why is it so important for us to read books? Audible, can you all hear me? Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, Penelope?
Okay, hello everyone. To answer your question, for me, reading books is important because, first of all, if you want to acquire knowledge, by reading, it's the best way to do that because when you read the word, you read the phrase, you actually remember it. It has a bigger impact. If when you read it, it has a bigger impact on you. If someone will tell you the information, maybe you will forget it, maybe not. I don't know. It depends on the person. For me, reading it engraves it in my memory. And second of all, if you read books, you read for many authors from many countries. And to me, this is a way in order to know a little bit about the background of the person who wrote the book, his life maybe, and how his life had an influence on his writing. And you can learn from that actually maybe more than you learn from the actual information that he is writing or her. It depends on the writer, if he or she, I don't know. This was my answer.
Oh, thank you so much, Penelope. You just made things a lot easier for me. I guess we should be done with this session. No, what Penelope said is very profound. She described the whole importance of book reading in a very profound set of words. That the first thing that she mentioned was you read because you want to understand the author. And I strongly believe that when you want to read and if you want to explore different narratives, you have to expose yourself to different authors. For instance, I don't know any, I still don't know much, but when I was 13, I was exposed to Transylvania. And how was I exposed to Transylvania? I started reading Bram Stoker's Dracula. And to me, although it is a work of fiction, but I was introduced to those marvelous castles that I marveled upon while I was reading. And I was exposed to all those intricate locations. And so for me, and then when I turned 16, I got exposed to James Joyce's Ulysses. I didn't know anything about Ireland. I've never been to Ireland, but I read so much of all those descriptions, that those vivid descriptions describing Dublin and other places of Ireland. And me, it was like I was traveling different parts of the world while I was sitting in one place. So that is the beauty of book reading. For instance, I'm not sure, but how many of you are familiar with the author Marcel Proust?
Pardon, which book?
Okay, Marcel Proust authored a novel which was in 7 volumes. It was titled Remembrance of Things Past. So in those 7 volumes, Marcel Proust described the French society during that particular era when those books were authored. He describes all the societies, he describes love, he describes all those intricate details that are associated with human nature. I have never been to France again, sadly, but I know that, okay, so this is what used to happen back in this particular era. So of the early 1600s looked like. When I started reading the works of Shakespeare, I came to the understanding, oh, so this is what goes on. I didn't know about the fate of kings until I was exposed to Richard III. I didn't know how to make wise decisions during times of crisis until I was exposed to Merchant of Venice. So the books kind of serve, not, now I'm going to phrase this in a very elementary manner, but I think it's a very profound phrasing when you say that books are your best friends. Books are your travel buddies. They can take you anywhere around the world and you don't have to spend much. Now, the problem is, in the country that I live in, and in most parts of the world, this is a very prominent problem that we see every day, that parents are forcing their children to read the textbooks. Now, I'm sure the textbooks are quite informative. They give you close insight into things. I was exposed to Isaac Newton's theory of gravity when I read my science textbook. But then what really sort of lured me into the whole fiction and literature was the beauty of art. It sort of takes you into a realm you've never imagined before. It kind of unlocks your imaginative potential, which brings me to my next point, that reading is important because it helps you to produce new ideas. Now, for most people, they would think that, oh, we have never read a single book in our lives, yet we produce such mind-wrecking ideas. Well, that's what they think. To produce ideas, you have to first expose yourself to ideas that have produced in the past. You cannot write about the fate of kings if you do not read the works of Shakespeare. You cannot write about things. You cannot write about gravity. You cannot proceed further with the research of gravity unless and until you do not expose yourself to the teachings of Sir Isaac Newton. So ideas are important. And then I would like to come to another point, which is that since I belong to media sciences and I'm an avid lover of cinema, the thing is that when you get ideas, you have to put them on canvas. And in order to put them on canvas, you first need to know how to put them on canvas. So for instance, many novels, the example that I delivered initially was of Dracula. We have seen that Hollywood has made different adaptations of books. So how, if it wasn't for Bram Stoker, if it wasn't for his idea, if it wasn't for his incredible idea of exposing the world to this eccentric and to this vampire, do you have been able to see something as glorious as the film itself? We wouldn't, because the idea will never surface. So in order to communicate, you need ideas. And where do ideas come from? They come from books. They come from different authors. And ideas come from the thing. And in order to think, you first need to be open to new things. For instance, read as much as you can. Now, I'll ask you this, that how many of you have something to say? Okay, I'll repeat my question. How many of you have something to say? I'm sure everyone has a lot to say. I mean, okay, so I'll answer to that question by saying that when you have something to say, you definitely have something to write about. It's impossible for anyone to say that I have something to say, but I cannot write. If you can say something, you can write something. And if you can write something, you can say something. To be a great writer, you have to be a great reader, and vice versa. For instance, how many of you are familiar with dystopian or dystopia?
Sorry, Noshirwan, I would like to take a few seconds. Interns, if you want to, give the answer, just unmute and talk. All right, don't wait for us.
Okay, all right. So the reason why I'm talking about dystopia is when I was young, when I was fairly young, I was exposed to the horrors of the real world, and I didn't know all sorts of horrors are there, and we still get to see these horrors in our everyday lives. For instance, we have political horrors, we have horrors that are associated with injustice, and I wasn't familiar with it. Until I started reading the work of George Orwell. I was exposed to the book called 1984, and then I was exposed to another book by George Orwell, which was Animal Farm. And when I read 1984, I began to understand that, okay, so this is what tyranny is all about. How we are currently living in a tyrannical epoch, and we are not even aware of this. So if it wasn't for George Orwell, I would have never understood the whole concept of dystopia. Now, when I read George Orwell, I started to say, okay, we are living in a dystopian society and something needs to be done. I understood, okay, yeah, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, my connection got interrupted. Well, where was I? Yes, George Orwell. So 1984, the world, not just a dystopian society, but the world itself is a dystopia as of now. We get to see political horrors every day. We get to see cases that project and orchestrate horrors associated with injustice. And I didn't know about any of these until I exposed myself to 1984. And then I started reading this book called A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. And I came to the understanding that the world was, and to my next point, that it is crucial for us to read history as well, not just literature. We need to expose ourselves to different bits of history. For instance, here's a funny anecdote. When I was somewhere around 15, I got my hands on Tumblr and I started scrolling through different quotations, and there were quotations based on all kinds of things. Okay, the past is this, the present is this, and the future this and that. And I used to think that, okay, the past is not important. I need to focus on the present. But then I came to the understanding that if I don't understand the past, how can I focus on the present and transition into the future? So past is important. History is important. You need to understand that why history is important. And the only way to do that is when you read books. For instance, being a Pakistani, when I read about the war of 1857, for me as a Muslim, and for when we were with India as a Muslim, and for Hindus, that war is hailed as the War of Independence. But when I read the works of different British historians, there's a difference of narratives. And when you read history, you get to understand that what side you are on and what really made the present possible. So to understand history and to understand the present, you first need to revisit the past, understand that what actually led us to the present, and how we can focus on the present and then transition into the future. Again, the importance of reading. You do not read history, you do not know what the world is all about or what the world was like around 50 years ago, or maybe 100 years ago. When one of the most prominent topics of the 21st century is women's rights. When we talk about women's rights, we can go all the way back to the 1600s, that when women who were empowered and who had knowledge and who were far superior than other members of the society, they were hailed as witches. Why? Because people were not reading, people were not exposing themselves to different ideas. And women who were, they were labeled as witches and they were executed. And sadly, it sort of saddens me to the core when I say this, that we are still living in an era when women who are educated, who are well-read, who are empowered, who have brilliant ideas, they're still labeled as witches. In different parts of the world, women are being killed, and in different parts of the world, women are being neglected. So again, how do we transition from an illiterate society and transition into a more literate one? We need to read. And not just read, we need to understand that what is the true importance, the significance of reading. When people read about Romeo and Juliet in my school, I was told that, okay, it's a love story. And as I grew older, I came to find out that Romeo and Juliet is not a love story. It deals with a far more critical issue, which is tribal wars. It deals with tribal wars of how different tribes fight with one another, and in result, someone or a group of people end up getting killed. So this is in my view, the importance of reading. But then again, this brings me to another question: that why do you think it is important for us to read so that we can focus on the present and transition in the future?
Yes, for me, it's pretty simple. For me, it's just to learn. And I'm saying this because I'm actually living what I'm telling you right now. Because in Lebanon, we had a civil war in 1975 that we had no winner, we had no loser. History was not written because we haven't decided on one fixed history. Hence, we couldn't learn what we did wrong. So now we're reliving what we lived during the 70s. And to me, this is really devastating for the Lebanese people, because we had the opportunity to learn, we had the chance to actually learn, to evolve, to fix our issues, but we chose not to. And this is really heartbreaking for me. And that's why I actually love history, because you could learn so many things from history, not only your country's history, but general history in general. And this is why maybe this is how I thought about it.
Absolutely right. Reading requires documenting stuff. You know, if you want someone to read your work, you first need to document it. The reason why you need to document your findings, or when we talk about history, it's important to document history as well, because you want other people to know what happened in the past. and so that they can extract different ideas and then implement them in the present. Again, when we talk about history, I'll summon the example of Sir Isaac Newton again. If Sir Isaac Newton wouldn't have documented the theory of gravity, we still wouldn't have been able to know that what keeps us on the ground. Being down to earth is one thing, but then when you put it into a scientific context, you come to the understanding that, oh, okay, so there's a gravitational force that's pulling us down, and we are not in the sky, and there's a good reason why not. So yes, I understand that uh, um, so history, again, history, literature, poetry, you talk about fiction, non-fiction, you talk about dystopian novels, you talk about different utopian novels and all these other, you talk about horror, thriller, all these kinds of books. I happen to be an avid reader of horror fiction. I know it comes off as very peculiar, but I enjoy reading the works of Edgar Allan Poe, and my plate I can furnish it however I want. But then again, I'll get to the nub of the topic that I reading is important because we need to understand what happened in the past. We need to understand the present so that we can transition into the future. Reading will always be the most important thing in the past. It is going to stay relevant in the present, and it will go on to stay relevant in future as well. So that's about it. That's my part. I hope that I was comprehensible throughout.
Yes, thank you so much.
So you're welcome. If any of you have any questions, I will be more than happy. Yes.
Yes, I have a question. I'm Didi Ambe from Cameroon. Can you hear me, please?
I'm sorry. Can you please repeat your question?
I'm asking if you can hear me.
If I can see you?
Here,
Yeah.
here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, this is my question. So I am from Africa, in Cameroon particularly. So many people, many children, let's say from the age of, let's say maybe 3 to 5 or 7, don't have access to these books to read. Myself, I did not have access to have books when I was young to be reading always. Now my question is, how do you qualify myself and another child that has had access to book to read all through her life and myself?
Okay, so when we talk about such things, it's more political because it mainly depends on the governments that are not doing enough because different governments have different. First of all, I feel enormously sad about the fact that for the children who do not have access to books, and this is again a fault from the government's end. The government is responsible for supplying books, and if the government does not see reading fit, then they are causing more danger or to the society. And I honestly believe that the government is not capable to govern over people if they are not imposing, but they're not paying much heed to the importance of book reading. So again, it's political. There are other parts of the world where people are deprived of books, and it is quite sad. But it's as people, we need as people from more who do not have access to books, we can supply them with books. So then again, I see you that you have access to the internet. So if you cannot find paper books, you can read them off the internet. The internet is densely populated with ebooks. So we can also make good use of the internet. We can go through different PDFs. There's all kinds of platforms. We have Amazon, we have Apple Books. So you see, it's again, if you don't have access to books, try reading ebooks. If you do not have access to ebooks, you have access to a library, even better. So you have to find different alternatives. You have to tunnel your way through, because if your government is not willing to help you out, then you shouldn't stop learning. You need to be eager. You need to have that potential that no matter what goes on, no matter if the government is not paying enough attention to our reading habits, then we need to develop our reading habits on our own.
Yeah,
I hope that
So,
answer.
so what
Yeah.
if you can have access to, my worry is young children, let's say from the ages of 3, they don't have access to phones. You need to pay for internet. You need to pay for the books that you want to buy on you need money to do all these things. You've not answered my question. Say, how do you qualify such children who don't have access to these books and the other children who have access to books to read always?
Well, you did mention that the children of the ages of 3, I you can read out to them, because I hardly think that children of the ages of 3 are capable of reading. They are capable of listening, so you can read out to them. Or if you want to share stories with them, you can utilize your imagination. Or people who are older than children, they can start reading. So for instance, this brings me to a very important part. So if you want your children to learn, then you have to be a great learner yourself. So as a parent, you have to find a way that, okay, so my child is unable to read, or my child doesn't have enough books. Then you, as a utilizer of internet, can make good use of it, expose yourself to different stories, and read out the stories to your child, so that when he or she grows up, they understand the significance and the relevance and the importance of book reading. I hope that answers your question.
Hello. Okay, I have a
It
question.
has, to an extent, but it's okay.
I have a question as well.
Yes,
I don't know if
please.
I can go ahead.
No, I didn't have any.
Yes, thank you so much.
I thought.
There's a bit of
I
distortion
have,
from your end. Can you please fix your microphone?
okay, can you hear me now, sir?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. I found the session very insightful, very eye-opening. Yeah, I was wondering if it was possible. Mine isn't a question; it's more like a request. If it was possible to sort of get like a reading list, or recommend some of the books you recommend we check out, in terms of women's rights and.
Wow. Okay. Every time I'm asked to recommend a book, I always feel excited, because it's my favorite thing to do. But if I start listing the books that I would love to recommend, I don't think that we'll be able to end this meeting for the next 1 week. But so again, let me put it this way. If you have access to a library, if you have access to a bookstore, visit. Visit every week. Go there, buy books, reserve a certain amount of money every month, that, okay, this is the kind of investment that I'm going to make on books. And I would say this, that most of my investments go in buying books. I just buy books, not just randomly, but I'm very. Okay, can I please ask you to mute your microphone?
Okay, no,
Okay.
that's
Okay. There we go. That's perfect. All right. The books that I would recommend you to read based on women's rights. Okay, let's see. I would suggest that you start reading literature because that's how I was exposed to different or female authors. I would recommend you to read To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I would recommend you to read the works of Jane Austen. There's a book called Pride and Prejudice. I'm sure you must be aware, and if not, I would really recommend you to read Pride and Prejudice. Then we have
Good
different
book.
authors.
No, I'm talking about Pride and Prejudice. It's a good book.
Yes, it is. It is a good book. It's wonderful, and I can see it here right in front of me. And then you can read the works of Virginia Woolf. There's Jane Austen. But then you can also expose yourself to different authors such as Shakespeare, which again is a very prominent name when we talk about book reading. You can expose yourself to the works of George Orwell, Aldous Huxley. The one book that I would recommend you to read as of now is 1984 and A Brave New World. 1984 is by George Orwell and A Brave New World is by Aldous Huxley. It will give you a very deep insight as to how the world that we are living in is a dystopian society. And so I hope that answers your question. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it does. Thank you
Yes,
so
we
much.
can. Yes, we can. It's fine.
Okay, I hope my answer catered to your question.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Thank you so much, sir.
No problem. Any more questions? Does anyone have any more questions?
I do actually have one question, but first of all, I would like to thank you. Truly, I learned a lot from the information you shared with us. Moving on to my question, I'd like to know your opinion. Do you think there is a relation between peace and literature and how one could influence the other?
Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, you're asking me that is there a relation between peace and literature, right?
Yes, or it doesn't have to be literature, any genre of writing. Maybe it is history, critical writing. I don't know, any genre of information telling or information in general, regardless of how you are presenting this information. Do you think peace has an influence on this? And well, I ask this question because some say that sometimes the winner might falsify the information shared. That's what I'm asking, to see if you think that people who believe in this theory are right, and if yes, how can we fix this? And also, if a country is in a state of peace, does this influence the writers and the artists in this country?
It's a very interesting question. I love the fact that you mentioned that history is usually authored by winners. Um, in order to explore history, you need to be open to both sides. For instance, being a Pakistani, if I want to explore something about my country, I read both sides of history. I just don't read works by different historians who are on the Pakistani side. I expose myself to different authors as well. So I need to understand. And then history is all about you making the decision. The state, the government is always going in their patriotic spirit, is always going to tell you that we are the best. We are supposed to be the best. But you, as a human, need to understand that, okay, so this is what happened in this particular era, and this is what our contributions were, and this is what the other side did or was planning on doing. So then when you understand both narratives, then you find the middle ground and you start assessing these things. Okay, so this could have been possible. Now, okay, so if this happened, what if this didn't happen or something else might happen? Then come to, and then you draw a conclusion that what side do you need to be on? If you're going to rely others on dictating history to you, then sadly, it's not really learning. It's going to be more of a dictatorial kind of a medium that people are going to tell you, okay, you need to follow it rather than focusing on all the other important aspects. So again, it's all up to you. You have to make the decision. You have to be open to different narratives. You have to explore different of history to be able to understand that what is the most paramount piece of information that can be extracted. Coming to the second part of your question, that in history establish, absolutely. You as an individual need to understand that, okay, what happened in the past happened in the past. So for instance, I would say that there are two countries, hypothetically speaking, there are two countries and they were on the verge of war against one another. But in the present, we don't have that issue anymore. So you can figure out new ways that, okay, we might have had a difference of opinion, we might have had different conflicts in the past, but now since we have transitioned into a more advanced world and a more advanced era, we can make the decision that whether we want to stick to the same conflict that we were on in the past, or do we want to move on? History, the reason why, again, I'll lay great emphasis on this, that the reason why history is important is that you need to understand the mistakes that leaders made in the past so that you can rectify those mistakes and try not to repeat them in the present, so that in the future generations expect the same lesson from you and they can implement the same lesson in the future as well. I hope that answers to your question.
Yes, it does, but there's also a part that I'd like you to elaborate more about it, and that is how how the peace you're living, or let me give you an example. When Victor Hugo wrote a book about poverty and how the state was oppressing the people in general, it's Les Miserables. Paris was not peaceful. It wasn't peaceful. It had this huge gap between the noble and the poor people in general. And the same thing applies to Russian literature. They talk about Anna Karenina, how the nobility used to live, and so on. Now, we see in Europe and France, to be more precise, because I gave an example about France, it is more peaceful. We don't have this huge gap going anymore. So we are seeing that the literature is more general. It's more about storytelling. We don't have this huge it doesn't have a huge impact on us if we read it now. At least this is my perspective. So do you think that when the country has a lot of political affairs going that it needs to be criticized, does this thing help artists in general to write? Does it give them vast influence? I don't know how to put it in words, but it's just a thing that artists feel. Do you think that it has to come from a dark place in order to have a very insightful art or very insightful literature, or it doesn't have to be? It is actually linked only to skills the writer has. I don't know if maybe my ideas are a little bit mixed up.
No, I actually extracted a bit of something from your question. You said that literature, how can literature allow you to criticize your governments, right? That is your question.
Yes, that, and does it? Yeah, I mean, is criticizing the government, criticizing the society, issues needs to be fixed. Does it help artists and writers in order to actually write and being inspired?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, I will bring in George Orwell. 1984 is a novel that entirely revolves around the aspect of a dystopian society. After the world was exposed to 1984, they started writing new things. They started making movies. Hollywood is still making movies on dystopian societies, and it sort of allows you. So when you talk about a dystopian society, when you talk about a tyrannical form of government, it actually sparks this idea into the minds of different people, and they kind of feel the need that, okay, so this is something wrong, and the same is happening with us, and something should be done about it. For instance, if you read history, if you read the American history, you will come to find out that when uh, the U.S. was there was KKK, the Ku Klux Klan in the U.S. They were highly racist against the black people. And now that in the contemporary scenario, different people have been exposed to that side of history, and they have now extracted the idea that racism is wrong, and we shouldn't be prejudiced against people of different color, that we should be open to new ideas, we should be open to diversity. So again, reading and literature, or whether be it in the form of history or be it in the form of poetry, it kind of gives an artist a voice. If you're not going to read, you're not going to have a voice. If you're not going to expose yourself to ideas, you won't be able to produce your own. So again, do not think for one second that, okay, if I'm going to read literature, I won't be able to, I won't be creative, or I won't be able to criticize. Criticism is part of the human experience. To understand something, you first need to criticize it. In order to invest more thought process, you need to criticize things in order to have a better understanding. I hope that I've answered to your question adequately.
Yes, thank you so much. It was very eye-opening, honestly. Thank you so much.
No problem. So, okay, we have a question in the chat section. I'll just open the chat section right now. Okay, so it is coming from Neelam, and she asked that how can we work on collecting history? Okay, that's again a very interesting question. How do we collect history? First and foremost, you have to remove all kinds of bias that you have against a different country or different people. If you want to collect history, you have to be unbiased. You have to be ready. You have to be open to different narratives. You have to accept that your country or your people have been defeated in the past. If you're going to go out, and if you're going to go out for in search of finding or trying to explore the fact that, okay, I want my people to be the winners, that you won't be able to collect history. You will only be collecting frivolous patriotism, which is extremely detrimental for history. If you want to collect history, revisit different things, revisit different eras, talk to other people who lived in that particular era. For instance, you want to understand the early 1600s. Now it's impossible to find anyone living still living from the early 1600s. In order to do that, you need to have mortality. But if you want to explore the early 1600s, then you have different books. Again, authors have documented different instances of the early 1600s. Want to write about the Renaissance, you explore the works of different authors. You go through the works of Leonardo da Vinci. You expose yourself to different artists and understand that, okay, so this is what happened in the past, and I'm going to collect that bit of history, and then I'm going to further elaborate on that bit of history by understanding that this went on. Let me give you an example. I hope that Neelam is here with us. Yes, she is. Okay, so let me give you another example. Would scientists be able to further work on gravity if it wasn't for Sir Isaac Newton? Or would NASA have been able to further enhance the whole idea of telescopes if it wasn't for Galileo? Again, they collected the works, they collected scientific contributions of these two prominent scientists that I just mentioned, and then they further worked on these things. So to collect history, first revisit the past, and then again, the most important thing that I keep on stressing about is that you need to be open. Consider yourself as a journalist, because when you're collecting history, you're not just collecting history for yourself. You're collecting the people. And if you want other people to expose themselves to your contribution to history, then you need to be unbiased, and you don't have to pick sides. You just have to present a general. This is what happened. So Neelam, I hope your question has been answered. Are we still there?
Yes, we are. Can I have a question, sir?
Okay.
Thank you so much for the insights. Thank you very much. So my question is, we read so many books about conflict resolution, peace book, and when it comes to real life, the methods in which we read in the books that they were used to solve these conflicts are conflicting themselves. For example, I cannot read a book about negotiating thoughts, and then I come to a conflicting zones when I meet people conflicting or in a conflicting area, and I want to use this method. It doesn't work. So how can I work on these things? Like, they are conflicting, they are confusing my view.
Well, again, conflict erupts from skepticism. You are going to present your ideas, you are going to go out with the intention of negotiating with different people, and there are going to be skeptics who are going to prove as obstacles, and they are going to be stubborn. They are not going to be ready to listen to you or expose themselves to new idea. But again, the effort lies in trying and trying harder every time. Um, Different ideas are viewed differently, and it takes time. For instance, I'm sure you must be aware of the painter Van Gogh. When he used to paint, he people didn't really understand him back in the day. But now in the 21st century, he is hailed as one of the greatest painters of all time. So if it doesn't work now, it will work. It may be in the future, maybe after 50 years or maybe 60 years, but ideas actually work. So if that, okay, so if people are not going to listen to me right now, then there's absolutely no point for me to project such an idea. No, put your ideas out there. Make sure that you're vocal with your ideas. Maybe if they're not working right now, they might work in the future, or they might open some eyes within the next hour or so.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so do we have any more questions?
Okay, I promise you it's the final question. Maybe I'm asking too much, but really this is very intriguing to me. My question is...
No, it's perfectly fine. I appreciate your participation.
Okay. Do you think that other form of arts have an influence on literature? I mean, during 1915 in Lebanon, we had this huge hunger. Armenia had a genocide. I don't think people were I don't think people had time to actually document and write what was happening. People were searching for food. In Armenia, they were fleeing the country. But they had photography, and European came and took pictures, and we had photography that it popped into my mind. So do you think other genre of arts help it helps a little bit writers to document, to have more knowledge in order to write? Or no, we should label art as photography only focuses on photography and literature only focuses on writing, so on?
Okay, again, interesting question. Literature is not just words printed on page. Literature is a very broad term when you come to think of it. You There's literature has everything to do with ethics. Literature has everything to do with art. So what you said about photography, again, the whole aesthetic of photography plays a fundamental part when it comes to history. For instance, you mentioned that during the year 1915, people were suffering from hunger in Lebanon. But you can take the same example of World War One and World War Two. There was war in it was highly prevalent. And how do we know about World War One and World War Two? We have different pictures. Again, pictures say more than 1,000 words. Then again, you have words with pictures. It's like the ultimate combination. Again, art shouldn't be restricted only to the form of reading. The only reason why I emphasize on reading is because reading, I honestly believe reading is something that not many people are now focusing on. But other than that, if you want to pursue film, if you want to pursue photography, if you want to be a painter, all of these things are quite generous towards ideas. To be a great photographer, you need to have an idea. To be a great filmmaker, you have to have an idea. To be a great writer. So literature revolves around ideas. It's an avenue to explore different ideas and to put those ideas either on canvas, either on a piece of paper, either a camera lens, or you can actually project your ideas in a form of film. So again, literature is a very broad term, and it involves all the artistic forms that are required to exhibit ideas that come from creative people.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so do we have any other questions? I think not. So I think this marks the end of our session. If we'd like to invite her to this. Other than that, thank you everyone for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you for participating, asking questions, and yes.
Thank you so much, sir. I hope
Thank you.
we all understand the reading, the importance of reading for history.
Okay, so I bid you farewell. I hope you found the session to be interesting. You extracted different ideas or something to think upon. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The pleasure was ours. Thank you so much.
Please, can we have a couple of the books shared with Mahim so we can get them in our group? We could read them sometime.
I'm sorry. Can you please repeat your question?
I was saying, please, can you have the books that you just listed shared with Mahim so she can share it in our WhatsApp forum? We can just get it from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll share a list with Ms. Maheen, and she will forward that this and share this with you.
Thank you so much.
No problem.